I never thought my life could turn upside down in a single moment. Just days after my grandfather's funeral, I sat in his lawyer's office, still grieving, still numb, when I heard the words that changed everything. Emily, your grandfather left you everything. The house, the land, and 900. My breath caught. I wasn't sure if I should feel grateful, shocked, or terrified. Before I could process, the door opened. My parents, the same people who had abandoned me 10 years ago, walked in as though nothing had happened. Their smiles were wide, but their eyes glittered with something I recognized instantly: greed. "We're your guardians," my mother declared, sliding closer as if she had any right. But then my grandfather's lawyer stepped forward, his presence filling the room. When his sharp gaze landed on them, their faces paled. That's when I knew the storm was only beginning. I was 8 years old when I realized I was invisible in my own family. My parents never said it outright, but their actions painted the truth loud and clear. Ryan, my older brother, was the sun they revolved around, and I was nothing more than a shadow. Ryan was athletic, tall for his age, and already the shining star of the local football team. Every weekend was spent at his games. Every dinner conversation filled with his scores, his coach's praise, his upcoming tournaments. Mom ironed his jerseys like sacred cloth. Dad polished his cleats as if they were family heirlooms. And me? I was the one left behind, curled up in my room with library books, listening to the distant roar of a crowd that never cheered for me. It wasn't that they neglected me in the physical sense. I had food, clothes, and a roof. But the love, the laughter, the glow of belonging, those were reserved for Ryan. When he got an A on a test, the whole house celebrated with cake. When I did, it was a passing nod, a distracted "good job," before they rushed off to his practice. I tried not to care, but children notice. Silence becomes a wound, and mine grew deeper with each overlooked moment. One suffocating summer night, I padded down the hallway for a glass of water. That's when I heard it hushed voices in the living room. My parents. They thought I was asleep. "Mike, we can't keep this up," my mother whispered, her voice sharp with exhaustion. "The mortgage is killing us, and your hours keep getting cut. We're drowning." My father sighed, the sound heavy, defeated. "I know, Linda, but what choice do we have? We can barely afford Ryan's equipment and camp fees. College for all three? Impossible." My stomach tightened. All three? There were only 2 of us kids, unless they still counted me. Then Mom's voice dropped lower. "Your father, Richard, he's got that huge house in Texas. He's alone since your mother passed. He's asked about Emily before. Maybe she'd be better off with him." The glass in my hand trembled. Better off with him? My own mother was planning to give me away like I was an extra bill they couldn't pay. Dad hesitated. "Do you think he'd take her?" "He would. He always asks about her. And honestly, Mike, we can't do this anymore. Ryan needs everything we've got. Emily will be fine. She's quiet. She'll adjust." I pressed my back to the wall, heart pounding so hard I thought they'd hear it. I didn't understand all of it, but I understood enough. They wanted to leave me. Not Ryan, not themselves. Me. I stumbled back to my room and crawled into bed, clutching my pillow. I tried to convince myself I'd misunderstood. Parents didn't just get rid of their children. That wasn't real. That wasn't possible. A month later, school ended. I hoped, foolishly, that maybe we'd take a family trip. Instead, Mom packed my things into the trunk. "We're visiting Grandpa Richard," she said brightly, like it was a fun surprise. Ryan stayed home for football camp, of course. The drive to Texas felt endless. I pressed my forehead against the window, watching miles of flat fields blur past. My stomach churned with unease. They spoke little during the trip, their faces tight with something I couldn't name. When we finally pulled up, my breath caught. The house was massive, white columns rising against the blue sky, acres of land stretching in every direction. It was beautiful, intimidating, a place that felt too grand for me. Grandpa Richard stepped out, tall and commanding, his silver hair neat, his eyes a piercing blue. For a moment I froze, but then he looked directly at me, and something softened. "So this is Emily," he said, his deep voice rumbling like gravel. He crouched slightly, meeting my gaze. "You've grown into quite a young lady." I nodded shyly, clutching the hem of my shirt. No adult had looked at me like that in years, like I mattered. We sat in his kitchen, the smell of fresh bread lingering in the air. My parents chatted about mortgage payments, about Ryan's football career. I stared at the patterns in the tablecloth, unease prickling my skin. Then Dad cleared his throat. "Well, we should be heading back. Long drive," he said casually, rising from his chair. I blinked. "Wait, back? What about me?" Mom exchanged a glance with Dad. "Sweetheart, you'll stay here with Grandpa for a little while, just until things settle." My heart dropped. "For how long?" Dad avoided my eyes. "We'll see. You'll have fun here. Grandpa's got a big yard, cable TV, and plenty of space." I scrambled to my feet. But when are you coming back? What about school?" "We'll figure it out," Dad said over his shoulder, already walking toward the door. Mom pressed a quick kiss to my cheek, her lips cold. "Be good, Emily. We'll call." And then they were gone. Just like that. I ran to the porch, the hot Texas wind whipping my hair as I watched their car shrink down the dirt road. My throat burned with words I couldn't scream. "Don't leave me. Please." But they didn't look back. Not once. A heavy hand rested on my shoulder. Grandpa Richard stood beside me, silent. His presence was steady, solid, but it couldn't fill the gaping hole left behind. That night, I lay in the canopy bed, the sheets too crisp, the room too large. I pressed my face into the pillow and cried until sleep dragged me under. They had chosen Ryan. They had chosen themselves, and they had not chosen me. It was the night my childhood ended. The first few days in Grandpa Richard's house felt unreal, like I had been dropped into a stranger's world with no way back. Everything around me was too big, too polished, too quiet. My room was larger than our entire living room back in Alabama, complete with a canopy bed, its own bathroom, and windows that stretched wide over the pastures. At night, instead of hearing Ryan's video games through the wall, I lay awake listening to crickets and the deep, steady ticking of the grandfather clock down the hall. At first, I kept waiting for the phone to ring, for my parents to call, to explain, to promise they'd be back soon. I even kept my suitcase packed in the corner, half convinced I'd need to leave at any moment, but the phone stayed silent, the suitcase collected dust, and the realization settled in. They weren't coming back. Grandpa wasn't like my parents. He didn't hover with false smiles or empty reassurances. He was strict, sharp, and carried himself with the weight of someone who had worked hard his whole life and expected others to do the same. But beneath that stern exterior, I began to notice something different. He saw me. On my second morning, he sat across from me at breakfast, coffee steaming in his mug. "Sleep all right?" he asked. His tone was casual, but his eyes waited for a real answer. "Sort of," I mumbled. "What woke you?" he pressed. I blinked, surprised. "The clock. It's loud." He nodded once, stood, and after a moment I heard the chimes stop. That evening he showed me how to shut it off at night. It was such a small thing, but it struck me harder than any birthday gift my parents had ever given. He had listened. He had acted. As days passed, he pulled me into his routines. Mornings started early, with chores before breakfast. Feeding the chickens, collecting eggs, checking the fences. At first, I dragged my feet, my small hands clumsy with the grain bucket. But Grandpa was patient. He corrected my grip, demonstrated, and then let me try again. "You'll get stronger," he said simply. "Hard work builds more than muscles. It builds character." I didn't fully understand then, but I carried his words like a secret coin in my pocket, rubbing it whenever I felt small. On Saturdays, we drove into town. He signed me up for a library card, introducing me to the librarian as my granddaughter Emily. My chest swelled at the pride in his voice. At the feed store, every man in dusty boots seemed to know him, and he shook their hands firmly. To each one, he said my name. My parents had spent years treating me like background noise, but here, I was visible. Slowly, I adjusted. I learned to ride Ginger, the old chestnut mare in the stable. I learned how to mend a fence with steady hands instead of rushed ones. Grandpa taught me to plant tomatoes in neat rows, to measure twice and cut once when we built a new chicken coop. Every task came with a lesson, not just about work but about life. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the horizon, we sat on the porch. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the fields. "Emily, money comes and goes," he said. "But character, that's what keeps a person standing when everything else falls apart." His words etched into me, though I didn't know how much they would matter until years later. Despite his firm rules, Grandpa had a softer side. It showed in small ways, saving me the last biscuit at dinner, tucking a wrapped book on my pillow, or carrying me inside when I fell asleep on the porch swing. When I caught the flu that winter, he sat beside my bed all night, reading aloud from an old Western novel. His gravelly voice was steady, comforting, and I realized he wasn't just keeping me company, he was making sure I knew I wasn't alone. By the time I turned 10, I no longer cried at night waiting for a call that would never come. By 12, the sharp ache of abandonment had dulled into a scar. My parents never wrote, never sent a card, never asked about me. But Grandpa filled the silence with his presence. He attended my school plays, clapped loudly at my piano recitals, and scolded me when I rolled my eyes at teachers. He wasn't just a guardian, he was becoming my family. There were moments I tested him, moments born from the fear that maybe one day he'd tire of me the way my parents had. Once, after a bad day at school, I shouted that I didn't belong here, that I wanted to go home. He didn't yell back. He simply looked at me, calm but firm. "This is your home, Emily, whether you want to believe it yet or not." I stormed off, slamming my door. Hours later, when guilt gnawed at me, I crept into the kitchen. He was still there, reading the newspaper. He looked up, his face softening. "Everyone needs to test their roots sometimes," he said. "But you're not going anywhere. Not unless you choose to." That was the first night I slept peacefully. For the first time in years, I knew someone had chosen me. By the time I turned 13, the rhythms of Grandpa's house had become my rhythms too. What once felt foreign and intimidating now felt like home. The creak of the porch swing, the smell of biscuits in the oven, the sound of Ginger's hooves against the dirt path, all of it stitched itself into the fabric of my daily life. I was no longer the unwanted child left behind. I was Emily, granddaughter of Richard, a man who believed in discipline, patience, and quiet strength. School in Texas was different from Alabama. Classes were smaller, teachers knew everyone's names, and kids didn't judge me as much for being bookish. I made my first real friend, a girl named Sarah, who lived down the street. She wasn't dazzled by Ryan's trophies or family reputations. She liked me because I loved reading and could make her laugh with silly impressions of our math teacher. For the first time, I felt what it was like to be chosen by a friend, not tolerated. Grandpa encouraged my friendships, but kept his expectations clear. "Schoolwork first, chores second, fun third," he would say, tapping the kitchen table for emphasis. I groaned about it often, but secretly, I thrived under the structure. Unlike my parents, who had barely glanced at my report cards, Grandpa reviewed every grade, every comment from teachers. When I brought home my first straight-A report card, he smiled, not a big, flashy grin, but a small, proud curve of his lips. "That's good work, Emily. You should be proud." Coming from him, those words meant more than any cheer ever had. Evenings were my favorite. After chores and homework, we cooked dinner together. He showed me how to season a roast, how to make gravy without lumps, how to tell when bread was done by tapping it. Cooking wasn't just about food, it was about patience, attention, and care. While the food simmered, he'd tell stories from his younger days, how he built his business, how he almost lost everything once, how he learned that money could disappear overnight, but integrity was what brought him back. His stories were never just entertainment. They were lessons wrapped in memory. Sometimes he took me along to his office, where he still handled investments and property. He showed me spreadsheets, explained interest rates, and demonstrated how to calculate risks. At first, it was overwhelming, but he broke it down step by step. "You don't have to be afraid of numbers," he said. "They're just tools. Learn to control them, or they'll control you." I didn't know it then, but he was planting seeds for the future career I would one day choose. By 14, I had a small circle of friends, joined the school soccer team, and even started piano lessons. Grandpa attended every recital, clapping louder than anyone, his rough hands red from applause. He didn't just provide a house and money. He gave me presents. He showed up. That mattered more than anything. Still, there were moments of tension. When I turned 14, Grandpa asked me something that caught me off guard. "Would you like to visit your parents? I can arrange it." My heart clenched. For a second, I pictured it, walking back into their house, seeing Ryan again, hearing my mother's voice. But the fantasy shattered quickly. They had never called, never written, not even a birthday card in 6 years. If they cared, wouldn't they have tried? I shook my head. No. They made their choice. Grandpa studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "I just wanted you to know the option was there." We never spoke of it again. High school brought new challenges. I faced bullies who sneered at my thrift store clothes, crushes that left me flustered, and late nights of studying. Through it all, Grandpa was steady. He didn't coddle me when I cried over heartbreak. Instead, he handed me a tissue and said, "Feel it, learn from it, then stand up taller." When I doubted myself before a math exam, he reminded me of the fence I had once thought I couldn't mend. "You fixed it, didn't you?" "Same here. Don't tell yourself you can't until you've tried twice." His faith in me built something my parents' neglect never had: confidence. I began to believe I was capable, not because someone handed me compliments, but because I earned them through effort. When I scored high enough to qualify for the advanced placement program, Grandpa didn't throw a party. Instead, he sat me down, looked me straight in the eyes, and said, "This proves what I've always known. You are smart enough, strong enough, and worthy. Don't forget it." At 15, I started helping him with his bookkeeping, balancing accounts, tracking expenses, managing investments. It was tedious at first, but I grew to love the order of it. I loved the way numbers always told the truth if you looked carefully enough, Grandpa noticed. "You've got my knack for finance," he said one evening, tapping his pen against a column of figures. "You could make a career out of this if you wanted." For the first time, I began to imagine a future college, a profession, independence, a life not defined by abandonment but by my own choices. Of course, life wasn't perfect. Grandpa could be stubborn, his temper flaring if I shirked chores or talked back. Once, after I stayed out too late at a school dance, he grounded me for a week. I yelled that he was unfair, that he didn't understand teenagers. He folded his arms and replied, "Maybe so, but I understand responsibility. You'll thank me one day." At the time, I slammed my door. Later, I realized he wasn't trying to control me. He was teaching me that freedom and responsibility go hand in hand. By 16, I felt fully rooted in Texas soil. My scars from abandonment hadn't disappeared, but they no longer defined me. Grandpa had given me structure, love expressed through actions, and the kind of steady presence that healed old wounds. For the first time, I looked toward the future with hope instead of fear. I dreamed of college, of becoming someone my grandfather would be proud of, and deep down, I knew something important. I was no longer the girl my parents had left behind. I was the young woman my grandfather had raised to stand tall. When I turned 16, life felt steady, almost safe. I had friends, good grades, and a home that finally felt like mine. Grandpa was still strong, still working part-time at his office, still teaching me how to handle money and responsibility. But then little things started to change, and I noticed them before he ever admitted anything was wrong. He grew tired faster. Chores that once took him an hour stretched into 2. He lost weight, though he swore he was just eating lighter. At first, I wanted to believe him. But one evening, as he stood in the kitchen, his hand shook so badly that the glass he was holding slipped and shattered on the floor. The look on his face, frustration, fear, and something unspoken burned into me. "Grandpa, are you all right?" I whispered. "I'm fine," he muttered, crouching to clean the shards. But he wasn't fine, and we both knew it. A week later, he came home with a stack of papers from the doctor. He sat me down at the same kitchen table where he'd once told me my parents weren't coming back. This time, His face was paler, his eyes shadowed. "Emily," he said quietly, "I have cancer." The words didn't make sense at first. Cancer was something that happened to other people, people on the news, characters in movies. Not to my grandfather, the man who had been the rock of my life. I shook my head. "No, you can't." He reached across the table, resting his rough hand on mine. "I don't know how much time I have, but I'm going to fight it." The next months were a blur of hospital visits, chemotherapy sessions, and long nights when I listened to him groan softly in his chair, trying to hide the pain. I became his driver, his cook, his nurse. At 17, while my classmates worried about prom dresses and football games, I learned how to track medication schedules and change bandages. Sometimes, when the treatments were particularly brutal, I sat beside his bed and read aloud from the same old Western novels he once read to me. His eyes would close, his breathing shallow, but he would smile faintly. "You sound just like your grandmother," he murmured once. "She used to read to me when I was sick." Despite everything, he tried to shield me from the worst of it. He insisted I keep up with school, pushed me to apply for college, even when I argued that I should stay home. "Your future matters, Emily," he said firmly. "Don't let this stop you." But the truth was, I was terrified. Each day felt like sand slipping through my fingers, and no matter how tightly I tried to hold on, I couldn't stop time. On the morning of my 18th birthday, he was too weak to get out of bed, but he still managed to hand me a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate gold necklace, worn but beautiful. "It belonged to your grandmother," he whispered, "and now it belongs to you. You're strong, Emily. Stronger than you know. No matter what happens, remember that." I cried as he placed it around my neck. It wasn't just a gift. It was a passing of the torch, a reminder that even as his body failed, his faith in me never wavered. Some days, the cancer seemed to retreat. He'd smile more, eat more, even walk outside with me to check on the garden. Hope would bloom in my chest, fragile but bright. But then, just as quickly, it would collapse when the doctor shook his head at the next scan. The cycle of hope and despair was exhausting, but I refused to let him see me break. We developed a new routine. Mornings started with tea instead of chores. Afternoons were filled with quiet conversations, sometimes about memories from his youth, sometimes about the future he wanted me to have. He made me promise I would go to college, promise I would never waste the money he had saved, promise I would live a life worthy of everything he had given me. At night, when he slept, I sat by the window, staring out at the fields. Fear clawed at my chest. What would happen when he was gone? I had already lost my parents once. Losing him felt unthinkable. But deep down, I knew it was coming. The house was quieter, the air heavier, the clock ticking louder with each passing day. And yet, even in his illness, Grandpa was teaching me. He showed me that strength wasn't about never falling, it was about standing back up, again and again, even when your body screamed at you to stop. He showed me that love wasn't about grand gestures, but about presence, even when it hurt. One evening, after a particularly hard round of chemo, he looked at me and said, "Emily, life isn't measured by the years you get. It's measured by what you do with them. Don't waste yours." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. In that moment, I realized something important. My parents had abandoned me because love was inconvenient. Grandpa, even while dying, chose to stay. That difference defined everything. The summer I graduated high school should have been filled with celebration. My classmates threw parties, families hosted barbecues, and everyone seemed to be looking forward to the future. For me, the future felt like a storm cloud hanging overhead, heavy and impossible to ignore. Grandpa's health had declined sharply. The chemo that once gave us flickers of hope now left him frail and bedridden. On the morning of my graduation ceremony, I stood by his hospital bed, my cap and gown folded carefully in a bag at my feet. His eyes fluttered open, pale blue, dulled by exhaustion, but he still smiled when he saw me. "You're beautiful, Emily," he whispered, his voice raspy. "I'm proud of you." Tears blurred my vision. "I wish you could be there," he squeezed my hand weakly. "I'll be there in spirit, always." My friend Sarah's mom recorded the ceremony on her phone. and later set up a video call so Grandpa could watch me walk across the stage. When my name was called, I looked straight into the camera and held my diploma high. Grandpa's face lit up, and though he cried, it was with pride. That image of him, smiling through tears, is etched into me forever. A month later, he was gone. It happened quietly. One morning, I brought him his tea, only to find him asleep, his chest still. For a long moment, I just stood there, frozen, waiting for his breath to rise again. But it never did. I don't remember how I called the nurse, or how I stumbled through the next hours. What I remember is sitting by his side, clutching his hand long after it had grown cold, begging the universe for more time. I whispered all the things I hadn't said enough. Thank you. I love you. Please don't leave me. But silence was the only reply. The house felt hollow without him. His chair sat empty, the porch swing still, the fields outside too quiet. I wandered from room to room, touching the things he'd touched, trying to anchor myself to the man who had been my entire world. Carol, his oldest friend from town, stepped in to help with arrangements. She was gentle but efficient, handling phone calls, paperwork, and details I could barely comprehend. "Don't worry, Emily," she said softly. "We'll make sure he has the farewell he deserves." End of roulette. The funeral was held at St. Mary's Church, a small white building with tall stained glass windows that cast colorful light across the pews. About 50 people came: neighbors, former colleagues, townsfolk who respected Grandpa for his generosity and honesty. They filled the space with quiet reverence, speaking in hushed tones as they took their seats. I stood at the front, trembling, clutching the speech I had written. My voice shook as I began, but as I spoke about the man who had saved me, my words steadied. My grandfather was more than family to me. He was my guide, my protector, my teacher. He taught me that character matters more than wealth, that love is shown in actions, not words. When others left, he stayed. When I felt invisible, he saw me. And though he's gone now, the lessons he gave me will carry me forward. I will live in a way that honors him. By the end, I could barely see through the tears, but the congregation's quiet nods gave me strength. Carol spoke next, sharing stories of their decades-long friendship, painting a picture of the man beyond just being my grandfather. His humor, his stubbornness, his unwavering loyalty. Her words wrapped around me like a blanket. And yet, as beautiful as the service was, there was a hollow ache in my chest that nothing could fill. My parents hadn't shown up. I told myself I didn't care, that their absence was no surprise, but deep down, a part of me still longed for them to be there, if not for me, then at least to honor the man who had done what they wouldn't. After the funeral, guests drifted back to their cars, leaving me and Carol to lock up. Back at the house, I sat alone in the living room, surrounded by silence. The weight of the inheritance, though I didn't know the full details yet, pressed on me. I was 18, legally an adult, but I felt like a child again, lost and scared. That night, I found myself wandering into Grandpa's study. His desk was still covered with neatly stacked papers, his fountain pen resting beside a ledger. On the shelf above, binders filled with financial records lined up like soldiers. I ran my fingers along their spines, remembering the evenings he had taught me about budgets, investments, and discipline. "Control the numbers, Emily," he had said. "Don't let them control you." I sat in his chair, pulled one of the binders down, and opened it. The neat columns of figures blurred through my tears, but I traced them with my finger, determined to keep his lessons alive. The days that followed felt like walking through fog. I went through the motions, school paperwork, grocery runs, feeding Ginger, but everything felt muted. Each night, I reached for the necklace he'd given me, clutching it as if it could tether me to him. Then Carol reminded me, "There's the will reading next week, you need to be there." The thought made my stomach twist. I didn't care about money or property. What could matter more than the man I'd lost? But I went because Grandpa would have wanted me to. The lawyer's office was formal and cold, the leather chairs stiff beneath me. I sat alone at the polished table, heart pounding, bracing myself for whatever came next. That's when the door opened. My parents walked in. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating. 10 years of silence, 10 years of absence, and now, they strolled into the room as if they belonged there. Mom's smile was practiced, Dad's eyes scanning the office with greedy calculation. And behind them, Ryan trailed with the same smug expression he'd worn since childhood. "Emily," Mom cooed as though no time had passed. "Sweetheart, we're your family." My body went rigid. My voice cracked as I managed. "Why are you here?" They exchanged a glance. Dad spoke, his tone oily. "We're here to support you, of course. Losing your grandfather must be hard. But don't worry, we're your guardians." The words sliced through me like ice. Guardians? After abandoning me for a decade, after ignoring every birthday, every milestone, every plea? Fury bubbled in my chest, but before I could reply, the lawyer entered, briefcase in hand. His eyes flicked from me to my parents, and the faintest smile touched his lips. My parents' confident postures faltered. For the first time in years, I felt the balance of power shift, and though I didn't yet know the details, I sensed that everything, my grief, my inheritance, my very future, was about to collide with the past I had tried so hard to leave behind. The air in the lawyer's office felt heavier than the Texas summer outside. I sat at the long mahogany table, my palms damp, my mind still raw with grief. Grandpa had been gone less than 2 weeks, and already I felt like I was losing pieces of myself every day. Coming here for the will reading was supposed to be a formality, one last step in closing a chapter of my life. Instead, it became the stage for a battle I never saw coming. The door had barely opened before my parents strode in. 10 years vanished in an instant, and yet their faces looked older, harder. Mom's smile was plastered on, but her eyes glittered with something sharp. Dad's stride was purposeful, as though he owned the room. Behind them, Ryan walked with lazy confidence, his arms folded like he was already entitled to whatever came next. "Emily," Mom said in a syrupy tone that made my stomach churn. "Oh, sweetheart, we've missed you so much." I froze in my chair. A decade of silence. No phone calls, no birthday cards, no sign they remembered I even existed, and now they appeared here, in this room, acting like nothing had happened. "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice low, my throat tight. Dad leaned forward, resting his hands on the back of a chair across from me. "We're here because we're your family, and because you shouldn't be alone during a time like this. We're your guardians." The word hit me like a slap. Guardians. The audacity of it made my chest tighten with anger. Guardians were supposed to protect, nurture, guide. They had abandoned me without a second thought, left me crying on a porch while their car drove away. The only guardian I had ever truly known was lying in a grave. Before I could reply, the lawyer walked in. Mr. Patterson, tall, graying, with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing, carried his briefcase to the head of the table. His presence immediately shifted the air. He nodded at me first. "Emily, thank you for being here. I know this isn't easy." Then he turned to my parents. "Mike, Linda, I wasn't aware you'd be attending. How is Gra?" Dad cleared his throat. "Of course we're here. Margaret's will involved family, and we are Emily's parents." Mr. Patterson's eyebrows arched ever so slightly. He opened his briefcase, laid out several folders, and adjusted his glasses. "Very well, let's begin." The formalities blurred together: introductions, dates, verification of Grandpa Richard's signature. My stomach churned, my heart pounding louder with every page he turned. Finally, Mr. Patterson read the words that split the room in two. "Richard Thompson hereby leaves his entire estate, including his primary residence, all financial assets, and personal property to his granddaughter, Emily Thompson." Silence fell like a hammer. My breath caught. Entire estate? My chest tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't move. I had expected something, maybe the house, maybe some savings, but everything? All of it? Mr. Patterson looked up. "The total value is approximately $4,900,000, in addition to the property and assets." The number echoed in my skull. 4.9 million. It was surreal, almost incomprehensible. My grief tangled with disbelief until I could hardly breathe. Mom's chair screeched against the floor as she shot to her feet. This is outrageous. We are her parents. Of course we should have a say in how this money is managed. Mr. Patterson remained calm, his tone measured. Emily is 18 years old. In the state of Texas, she is a legal adult. This inheritance belongs to her alone. Dad's face reddened. No, you don't understand. In Alabama, where she was born, the age of majority is 19. That means she's still under our guardianship. A quiet chuckle escaped Mr. Patterson as he flipped to another page. Yes, but Emily has lived in Texas for 10 years. She is a legal resident of this state. And here, she became an adult the day she turned 18. Furthermore, your parental rights were legally surrendered when you abandoned her. Richard adopted her fully. Legally, you are no more connected to her than any stranger off the street. Ryan frowned, his voice breaking the tension. But she's still our sister. That has to count for something. Biologically, yes, Mr. Patterson said. Legally, no. Mom's voice wavered, desperate now. We only left her here because it was best for her. Richard could give her more than we could. We did it for her. I laughed, bitter and sharp. You left me because I was inconvenient. You didn't call. You didn't write. You didn't care. My voice trembled, but I didn't stop. You chose Ryan. You chose yourselves. Don't you dare stand here and pretend it was for me. The room pulsed with silence. For the first time, my parents' smiles faltered, their facade cracking. Dad slammed his fist against the table. It doesn't matter. Family takes care of family. I'm Richard's son. I deserve a share. Mr. Patterson's eyes narrowed. He slid another document across the table. Richard's will is crystal clear. Everything goes to Emily. Contesting it would be fruitless and extremely costly. And if you attempt to pressure her into sharing, that is harassment. The law is not on your side. My parents exchanged a look, panic flickering beneath their anger. Mom reached for me across the table. Sweetheart, please. Think about us. Think about your brother. We just want to help you manage all this. You can't possibly handle it alone. I pulled my hand back, fury burning in my chest. I don't need your help. Where were you when I was sick with the flu and Grandpa sat up reading to me all night? Where were you when I graduated, when he watched me walk across that stage through a video call because he was too sick to be there in person? You had 10 years to show up. You didn't. He did. He was my family. You're just strangers. Ryan muttered something under his breath, but I didn't care. The tide had turned. For once, I held the power. Mr. Patterson gathered his papers with finality. To make it perfectly clear, you have no legal claim here. If you persist, we will pursue restraining orders. I strongly suggest you leave this young woman in peace. The room hung heavy with defeat. My parents' faces shifted from anger to desperation. We need that money, Dad whispered. Our house needs repairs. Ryan wants to buy a place of his own. Please, Emily, we're still your family. I stood, my legs trembling but strong. No, family is the people who stay. Family is the people who choose you, not the ones who throw you away. Grandpa was my family. You're nothing to me. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, they gathered their things. Mom's eyes brimmed with tears. Dad's jaw clenched tight, Ryan's glare burning into me. They left without another word, the door closing with a finality that echoed in my chest. When they were gone, I collapsed back into my chair, my breath shaking. Mr. Patterson placed a steady hand on my shoulder. You did well, Emily. I know this isn't the end, they may try again, but you stood your ground. Richard would be proud. I nodded, tears finally spilling. For the first time since Grandpa died, I felt not just grief, but resolve. They had abandoned me once. They would not take from me again. When the heavy wooden door of the lawyer's office closed behind my parents, I thought it was over. I thought I could finally breathe again. But I was wrong. The battle didn't end in that conference room, it only changed shape. For the first few days, I stayed locked inside Grandpa's house, curtains drawn, clutching the necklace he'd given me as if it could shield me. The silence was both comforting and suffocating. I cooked small meals, fed Ginger in the stable, and tried to distract myself with books. Yet every creak of the floorboards made me think they'd come back. Every knock at the door made my stomach drop. The first call came 3 days later. My phone buzzed with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Emily. Mom's voice rushed through the line, syrupy and desperate. Sweetheart, please don't hang up. We made mistakes. We're sorry. Can't we start over? I gripped the phone tighter, anger and pain battling inside me. Start over? You left me. You didn't even come to his funeral. We couldn't cancel Ryan's celebration, she said quickly, as though that explained everything. But we're here now. We just want to be a family again. I hung up without another word. My hands trembled, but my heart felt steady. The next day, another call came from a different number. This time, it was Dad. Emily, he said, his tone rehearsed. Listen, we understand you're upset, but you need guidance. Handling that much money at your age, it's dangerous. Let us help. Think about your future. Think about the family name. I bit back a laugh. The family name? They had tossed me aside like trash, and now they wanted me to preserve some legacy for them? I hung up again. But they didn't stop. Calls came daily, sometimes 3 or 4 in a row, always from numbers I didn't recognize. When I stopped answering, they left voicemails. Mom sobbed into the phone, begging me to forgive her. Dad tried to sound logical, reminding me of bills and responsibilities. Ryan even called once, his voice smug. Come on, Emily. You don't need all that money. I'm your brother. Share it with me. I'll invest it, make us all richer. Isn't that what family does? Family shows up, I snapped before ending the call. Still, the messages piled up. Each voicemail felt like a fresh attempt to claw into the life I had built with Grandpa. At night, I listened to them, tears burning my eyes, not because I believed them but because it hurt to hear them pretend. For 10 years they hadn't cared. Why now, except for the money? Mr. Patterson had warned me. People get desperate when money is involved, he'd said. They'll try every angle: guilt, threats, manipulation. He was right. One afternoon, I stepped onto the porch to find an envelope tucked under the door. Inside was a handwritten note from Mom. Emily, please, we're drowning. The house needs repairs. Ryan deserves a chance to buy a home. You can't keep all this for yourself. Think of your family. You don't want to be selfish, do you? Selfish? The word made me laugh bitterly. Where had that concern been when they left me crying on Grandpa's porch? The calls escalated. Sometimes Mom's voice shook with guilt, telling me she hadn't slept since leaving me. Other times, Dad's tone turned sharp, accusing me of being ungrateful, warning me I couldn't survive without them. Once, Ryan left a message bragging about a business deal he wanted to make, as if I should hand him the money like a gift. Each time, I saved the messages, just like Mr. Patterson told me to. He said to keep everything texts, voicemails, letters, because evidence mattered. After nearly a month, I broke. One evening, as the phone rang again, I screamed into the empty room, throwing the device onto the couch. My chest heaved, tears spilling down my face. Why can't they just leave me alone? That night, I called Mr. Patterson, my voice trembling. I can't do this anymore. They won't stop. He was calm, steady, like Grandpa had been. You've done the right thing, Emily. You haven't responded beyond telling them no. You've documented everything. That gives us power. The next day, he filed an official cease and desist letter. The legal language was cold and final. If my parents or brother attempted to contact me again by phone, by letter, by showing up in person, we would pursue restraining orders and press charges for harassment. When he handed me a copy, my hands shook. Will it really work? It usually does, he said. Bullies back down when the law gets involved. And he was right. The calls stopped. The numbers disappeared. The house grew quiet again, not the suffocating silence of grief, but a silence that slowly began to feel like freedom. Yet, even with the harassment gone, I couldn't shake the ache inside me. Part of me still wanted them to have chosen me for love, not for money. I replayed old memories: Mom brushing Ryan's hair before a game, Dad shouting encouragement from the sidelines, and wondered if they ever thought of me at all during those years. But then I remembered Grandpa sitting by my bed when I was sick, Grandpa clapping at my recitals, Grandpa teaching me to balance a budget. Actions mattered more than words. and theirs had spoken loudly. In the quiet that followed their collapse, I finally allowed myself to grieve properly, not just for Grandpa, but for the parents I had wished for and never had. I wrote in my journal late at night, pouring out the rage, the sorrow, the final acceptance. They hadn't been my family for a long time. They had only confirmed it by trying to use me now. When I closed the journal, I felt lighter. I wasn't defined by their absence. I was defined by the love I had received from the man who stayed, and by the strength I carried into my future. When the phone finally stopped ringing, when the last letter had been tossed into a box marked evidence, when the silence settled across the house like a protective blanket, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Relief. For the first time since Grandpa's death, I could walk through the halls without flinching at every sound, without fearing another intrusion from the ghosts of my past. But relief was not the same as peace. Peace took longer. At 18, I was now legally the owner of a house, sprawling across acres of Texas land, and the beneficiary of nearly $5 million. The numbers still didn't feel real. Sometimes, late at night, I opened the folders Grandpa had organized, detailed accounts, investment portfolios, saving strategies, and ran my fingers across the ink as if the pages themselves could give me courage. He had prepared me for this moment, though I hadn't known it then. Mr. Patterson guided me carefully. "The first rule," he said during one of our meetings, "is not to spend out of grief. People often throw money at pain, trying to fill a hole it can't fill. Don't do that." I nodded, scribbling notes. "So, what should I do?" "Live your life," he replied. "Use the money as a tool, not a crutch. Richard trusted you. Trust yourself." With his help, I set up accounts for tuition, living expenses, and long-term investments. I kept Grandpa's land intact, determined not to sell the place that had been our home. The big house felt emptier without him, but it also felt like a part of him still lingered in every corner: the porch swing, the smell of his books, the sound of the old clock ticking through the night. College came next. I enrolled in the finance program at the state university, inspired by the lessons Grandpa had given me at his desk. Numbers had always been my comfort, but now they were my future. On my first day of classes, I wore the necklace he had passed down to me, tucking it under my blouse like a secret source of strength. Campus life was overwhelming at first. Surrounded by students whose biggest concerns were parties and exams, I felt older somehow, heavier with responsibility. But slowly, I found my place. I joined a study group, made friends in my dorm, and even began dating a boy named David who studied engineering. When I told him my story, half expecting him to look at me differently, he simply squeezed my hand and said, "You did the right thing." That simple acceptance meant more than I could explain. Meanwhile, the shadows of my parents lingered in the background. Though the cease and desist kept them away, I sometimes wondered if they still thought of me, if they still seethed over the money they couldn't have. But each time the thought came, I reminded myself, they had made their choice a decade ago. Grandpa had made his too, and I would honor his. Weekends, I often returned to the house. The chores felt less like obligations now and more like rituals of remembrance: feeding the chickens, walking through the fields, sitting on the porch as the sun dipped low. Each task tethered me back to him, grounding me in the lessons he'd woven into my life. I also kept a journal, a habit that started in the chaos of their phone calls and continued into calmer days. I wrote letters to Grandpa, telling him about my classes, my new friends, even my first real date. Sometimes I imagined him reading over my shoulder, nodding approvingly, maybe offering advice. Writing became a way to keep him alive, to bridge the gap between memory and presence. Over time, the grief softened. It never disappeared, grief doesn't, but it transformed. It became a reminder, a gentle ache that reminded me of what I'd lost, but also of what I'd been given. Because for every moment of pain, there had been a moment of love stronger than I had ever expected to receive. One night, sitting with David under the stars, I tried to explain. My parents gave me away like I was an extra burden, but Grandpa, he chose me. Every day he chose me. That's why I don't feel bad about keeping the inheritance. It wasn't theirs to begin with. David looked at me, his expression steady. Family isn't who shares your blood. it's who shows up. His words echoed exactly what Grandpa had always taught me. The future no longer felt like a storm cloud. It felt like a wide-open horizon. I studied hard, planned internships, and mapped out a career where I could one day help others manage money responsibly, just as Grandpa had taught me. I wanted to honor his legacy, not by spending recklessly, but by building wisely. Sometimes people asked if I ever regretted not reconciling with my parents. My answer was always the same. No. They had years to reach out, years to make amends, and they never did until money was involved. Their absence hurt, but it also clarified. Blood ties alone don't define family love, loyalty, and presence do. As the months turned into years, I carried that truth with me. Whenever I faced doubt, whenever loneliness crept in, I remembered the nights Grandpa sat by my bed, the mornings he pushed me to do better, the evenings we spent on the porch with the sun sinking low. Those memories were my inheritance too, more valuable than the numbers in any bank account. And so, my life began anew, not as the abandoned girl on a porch, but as the young woman my grandfather had raised to stand tall.